It's a lovely summer's day in Dublin. We're delighted to be joined by David McNamara and Alex Bacik from CrowdStrike on this very interesting topic in terms of how we're going to defend Ireland's critical sectors from modern attacks. So, quick intros before we get going. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caoimhe Gouling. I am an account director with CommSec. As I said already, David, founder of CommSec, and Alex, systems engineer of CrowdStrike, will be joining us today. So our agenda this morning is, as it will take us through a brief introduction. David will take you through a NIS2 update and how our critical sectors are, I suppose, how they are geared up towards NIS2, where we're at in terms of legislation, and what we can do to get maybe some quick wins. And we'll take you through the threat landscape, and also Alex will take us through how to defend our critical assets with a view to being more cyber secure. I guess just before we kick off, just to let you know a little bit of housekeeping, we will record this session. So just for anyone who's on the session live, you have implied consent for this video to be, or for this session to be recorded. We'll share it with you and those who couldn't make it live afterwards. Also, we would really welcome some audience participation. We do have some, we have a quiz at the end with a very nice CrowdStrike sponsored prize in Lego Formula One car. For those of you who don't know, CrowdStrike sponsor Formula One teams, and so we are delighted to be able to offer that as a prize for anyone who's live on the quiz today and wins it. So without further ado, I'll just take you through. So most of you know who CommSec are, as I can see here, but those who don't know, we're a dedicated cybersecurity partner. We're based here in Dublin with our SOC based in Blanchardstown in North County Dublin. We're an Irish company supported by our team in Dublin and afar. So we operate under four main pillars. So they are, we have our managed services, as I've mentioned. We have a security testing, which is probably our most mature offering, and in that I'll take you through that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. We have our technology solutions, of which we're delighted to be an elite partner of CrowdStrike, and then we have our professional services. So sorry, thanks for that, for skipping on there. So in terms of our team and our SOC, we have a 24/7 fully monitored security operations centre in Blanchardstown in Dublin. We offer a range of managed services from managed SIEM, managed security awareness, managed firewall, managed detection and response. So that's where we work with a number of clients across various sectors, where we act as a member of their security team. On the security testing side, we have the pen testing, web app, mobile application, a secure code review, and red team engagements, and we do that for a range of our clients, both on a once-off basis and on a regular basis. Our third-party vendor solutions, one of which CrowdStrike is one in that area. What we do is we strive to give. We go to the market. We look at the leading solutions, and then we strive to be at the highest partner level as possible, which demonstrates to our clients the commitment that we've made, both from a commercial and a training perspective. And then finally, our professional services. So under that, we would have our CISO as a service. We have a data protection as a service. And then I guess what David will touch on a little bit later on is in terms of our NIS2. So what we're providing a lot of clients with a gap assessment on where are they now and where do they need to get to and what are those steps. We also guide our clients along the journey towards NIS2, we can align to the likes of to CIS, or more likely ISO 27001. So I guess some of our customers are represented here in this slide, and what you can see here is that we're not vertically focused, right? So we have great referenceability across education, in logistics, media, semi-state, and a number of others. So we are relied upon across multiple industry sectors for a variety of services. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to David McNamara, founder of CommSec.
Thanks, Quiva. And thanks to everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it. I know it's time out of your busy schedules. Just a little bit about myself. I founded CommSec in 2013. We've about 25 employees and growing. We are certified to ISO 27001 2022 standard, so that includes data privacy. I also chair the Cyber Ireland Business Growth Committee, trying to promote the growth of cyber security companies in Ireland and abroad. And I also sit on the advisory board for Cyber Ireland. Background, kind of a bit of Big Blue and Siemens and Fujitsu, and originally the Defence Forces. Next slide. So NIS2, why is it in? What's happening? So NIS2 was brought in really because to defend Europe's critical infrastructure, and that's what we're really going to be talking about today. And it's across all different types of sectors, for business, private business, education, government, healthcare. Next slide, please. So the NIS directive to date, NIS1 was brought out in July 2016. So it was covering national infrastructure, but mainly to a small cohort of organizations, of about 100 organizations. It was since expanded, and mainly because what was happening, a lot of member states were adopting the NIS1 at various different points, and interpreting it their own way. So NIS2 came into force last year. It was meant to be transposed by the Irish government in October 2017, or sorry, October 17th, 2024, but that was missed due to the elections. So it's expected to be done this year. And it really covers a lot of regulatory obligations. It's much more severe in terms of penalties and risk measurements that are brought in, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So, as I mentioned, there's about 100 organizations already, and mainly essential entities. They've now expanded that to, in terms of scope, right? So it covered, obviously, transport, banking, financial markets, health sector, water, energy, digital infrastructure. And they've now expanded that scope out to include public administration, waste, space. And believe it or not, Ireland has a very strong space industry. Supplying into the EU, digital providers, manufacture, production and distribution of chemicals, research, food production, processing and distribution, postal and courier services, manufacturing and waste management. So what does non-compliance mean? So I'm sure a lot of the people on the call would have some knowledge of NIS2 and the obligations of it, but the fines are pretty severe. So there's 10 million for essential entities for non-compliance, or 2% of the worldwide turnover. And for important entities, it's €7 million, or 1.4% of the total worldwide turnover. Now, this could be in addition to GDPR fines, and I think that's an important note. So it's quite severe. But as well as having fines, it goes a little bit further, that it actually holds senior management and boards accountable from a cyber perspective in terms of governance. And that's a really important factor. And what can happen there is that organizations can be named and shamed, but so can individuals. And they can also be stopped doing their managerial functions. So as you can see on the left side, In terms of the enforcement, they can actually do external audits. This is the National Competent Authority. So the reporting entity or authority is the NCSC, but there are other national competent authorities depending on the industry sector. So, for example, finance is governed by the central bank as the national competent authority, and then Department of Communications has other organizations under that. So it really is, from a compliance perspective, a new directive that all organizations are going to be impacted on, not just the 4,000. And what I mean by that is actually the supply chain security. So that's one of the key directives as part of the NIS2 controls, is looking at your own supply chain and how they are providing security of your data and your information. So as they are the weakest part of the supply chain. So risk analysis and risk management is a big part of NIS2. And yesterday, the NCSE came out with some guidance and information around how you can actually comply with NIS2. So I'd recommend looking at the NCSE's website. So some of the 10 minimum controls, risk analysis, how you handle an incident, your business continuity measures, MFA, your security in system acquisition or development, and even maintenance, your supply chain security, as I mentioned, and it's really based around the policies and procedures to assess the effectiveness of your cybersecurity risk management measures. So policies are an absolute crucial part of this for your organization. So policies on cryptography and encryption, your basic computer hygiene and security training is a big part of it, particularly for your board as well, that they understand their obligations under NIS2 and DORA. So HR is another big part, access control, who has access to it, is there a need for them to have access, what encryption do you have in place, what is it covered by MFA, so you're limiting that to zero trust. Next slide, please. So another big part of the requirements for NIS2, for example, is the reporting of a serious incident. And that is within 24 hours of you discovering that you have an incident, reporting to the NCSC. You also need to report to your National Competent Authority. If it's health sector, for example, it's the HSE. And after 72 hours, it's a full notification. So one is a heads up, basically. You've got an incident, you think it's serious. Then you give a kind of full report within 72 hours, and then another 30 days, a final report. But in the meantime, they could look for updates on where you're at with the incident. And the reason they have this in place is primarily around to let other member states know about this type of attack. One, to see if it's a new attack, but two, to see if it's elsewhere within the EU, what actions they have taken. So there's a lot of collaboration going on between the EU member states on NIS2. So as I mentioned, the senior management are now held accountable. It is C-level, it is the board that are responsible, and it is the board who will be named and shamed for not carrying out their fiduciary responsibilities when it comes to information security and data protection. So next slide, please. So as I alluded to, the NCSE have brought more information out. So they've set a kind of draft risk management measures, or RMMs as they're called, and they've new guidance for organizations announced for yesterday's controls. So they've actually put the fun into cyber, as you will see. They've now come out with SciFun, which is a structured framework and certification scheme. So this is something you can actually certify to. Now, it's not mandatory, but it may go that way in the coming years, but that's to be done maybe by 2026. So this is based on a kind of the Belgium framework, and there's a tri-partnership between Romania, Ireland and Belgium on this, and it follows the NIST 2.0 framework. Currently it's at 1.1, so they're looking to update that in terms of improving some of the control measures to align more with NIS 2, and that's going to be available later on in this year. So again, I'd recommend looking at the NCSE website. So this is how it's going to be governed. And look, there are supports out there. Sorry, Barry, you can move on. Thanks. There are reports or supports out there. For example, the Enterprise Ireland have a grant for a security review. Now, it's not an audit, but it's 80% of €3,000. So you get €2,400 back for doing an assessment. And once you do that assessment, it will have recommendations and remediations of how you can improve your cybersecurity score, because it will be scored. And the NCSE then have just announced on the 13th of June a new round of funding. They've had 2 rounds already for a further €60,000 grant, again 80% funded, so you can get up to 60,000. So if you're spending 72,000, for example, you'll get 60,000 back from the NCSE. But that's based on the findings within the assessment that Enterprise Ireland have given. Now, a couple of things. 1, you need to be an Enterprise Ireland client in order to avail of that. And 2, you have to be an SME, so less than 250 employees. And they're kind of the key metrics there. Now, there's other, obviously, obligations within there. But as part of that improvement grant, as they're calling it, what you will have to do is another cyber assessment at the end to see that your score has improved. So it is a first or next step in threat management, identifying the risks in your organization, in the cyber security community, and it's building trust right throughout the supply chain. So why would you do it? It is a mind shift for clients. It's obviously Enterprise Ireland's most popular offer since 2024. It's a streamlined application if you're going to go for it. It takes 4 minutes to do. We've taken a lot of clients through this already. We've got them through the NCSE supports as well, and we're implementing those recommendations now for them. So what it really does, it speaks to your clients that that you have taken measures into securing your posture for cybersecurity. So it gives a good element of confidence in that and protects your brand. So what is assessed under the Enterprise Ireland Cyber Review? It's your software updates, your data backups, your access management, your antivirus, network security, cloud risk, remote working, third-party risk, again, is the big part of this. And this is where it really impacts nearly every organization in Ireland, because you will start to see a lot of questionnaires coming out based on the requirements of NIS2, and a lot of it is aligned to, for example, ISO 27001. So, and the questionnaires that would have normally been asked in there are now going to be prevalent for every organization, including small businesses as well, if they're part of the supply chain into an essential or an important entity. So what's the roadmap to compliance and resilience? Well, start with the risk assessment, and then try and map to a recognized standard. For example, ISO 27K, which will take you 95% of the way there, and having the technical controls such as NIST 2.0 in there will align you completely with NIS 2 requirements. I would also recommend implementing monitoring and response, particularly like CrowdStrike have a fantastic solution with their MDR. So maybe look at that as well, and regularly test and update your plans as well. And I'll hand over to Alex.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to present a couple of slides, not too many, be glad to hear. It's very nice to meet you all virtually. I'm Alex Bacik. I'm a systems engineer here at CrowdStrike. I've been with CrowdStrike for almost a year. Prior to that, I was at Palo Alto Networks and Symantec and various others. And I've worked across Ireland, the EU and US. So I'm here to talk today about CrowdStrike, the platform, the service, and how it can defend against modern attacks. And I'd like to do that in the context of we publish a global threat report every year. It's out about 2 months now for 2025. And it talks about the key cybersecurity trends and implications for Europe, for Ireland, and also how CrowdStrike can help. And I suppose CrowdStrike was sort of founded on the principle that you don't have a malware problem, you have an adversary problem. And that's the most interesting part of the job for me, is to understand how adversaries operate, what motivates them, what their tradecraft is, how they evolve that tradecraft. And essentially it falls into 3 broad categories for us. There's nation state, which is essentially focused on, could be espionage, sabotage, disruptive attacks typically, could be blended. For North Korea, for example, it's a revenue generation stream. The second category then would be e-crime. They're typically financially motivated, and I'll talk about how we name those in a minute. And then the third final category would be hacktivists, which are typically based on sort of activism, nationalism. You mostly do DDoS attacks, defacement. They hack and leak. There's sort of 3 different motivations, really, 3 different threat actor types, and those are the types that CrowdStrike, whenever we're doing a incident response, or whether it's a Falcon platform, which is our MDR platform, we will attribute where possible to these types of threat actors, so you get an idea of why you're being targeted essentially by a threat actor. Okay, in terms of the global adversaries, we track 257 threat actors. We divide them into roughly 140 activity clusters, and we typically name them according to their either nation state, hacktivist, or criminal, or e-criminal. We added 26 new last year. That's about 1 every 2 weeks. So we're adding plenty. Every time there's a new threat actor on the block, essentially, we start tracking them from a threat intelligence perspective. We start trying to figure out their tradecraft. We develop a concept called indicators of attack, which is essentially a way that we can attribute specific threat actors to different types of activity. So, for example, last year we saw Egypt and Kazakhstan developing a fairly extensive offensive cyber operations capability. The reason why it's so attractive for nation states is obvious. It's a low cost, high impact, and crucially, it's a deniable means of achieving their strategic objectives. So if you look at some of the most active, being Russia and so on, they're typically using the cyber arena as an operation of warfare now. And this is why it's important to keep up with the tradecraft as it's improving. Okay. So as you're probably well aware, there's a cybercrime ecosystem, and that's enabling things like data extortion and also ransomware. We have noticed, and this is highlighted in the threat report, a huge increase in access broker activity. They use social engineering typically, so they're not breaking into your environment. They're typically just walking in the front door with valid credentials. They're typically then selling on as part of that ecosystem to the highest bidder. So they're selling a sort of initial access. That initial access might be then sold to somebody who's interested, for example, in ransomware extortion. And that's why we, at CrowdStrike, we will track the most important metric being lateral movement. So it's not necessarily initial access, because that's typically achieved using various means, but what's really important to us at CrowdStrike is lateral movement. And what we mean by that breakout time is that's the time it takes for an adversary to move beyond the initial foothold into secondary systems. Why is that important? Well, that's important because the impact could be a ransomware outbreak, or it could be data exfiltration. That's the key metric that we're tracking. So that's in 2023, that was around 62 minutes. In 2024, which is the latest figures available, that's now 48 minutes. So you can see how that's decreased by a huge factor. And, you know, one of the scariest statistics I've seen is the fastest breakout time is less than a minute. And that's essentially the time that it takes to go from initial access to hands-on keyboard lateral movement. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how we adapt that now to an Irish context. And there's some key highlights, again, contained in the threat report. And what we've seen here is kind of a shift away from traditional, you know, the traditional maybe phishing attempt or email attack where you use say a weaponized MS Office macro, dropping something like CrowdStrike, and that's a largely automated process, largely because of enhancements in the endpoint detection capability of Irish organizations. That's raised the bar essentially. So that's increased the difficulty an adversary has in breaking in. What's lowered, I suppose, is the prevalence of tools like Gen AI. That's increased their ability to, you know, do things like phishing. And what that means for Irish organizations is, you know, you typically have this kind of social engineering and more activity around attacks on help desks, attacks impersonating help desks on individuals within your organization. We'll talk about specific threat actors like Curly Spider later on. But essentially, this is reflecting, you know, organizations adopting things like multi-factor organization, one-time passwords, things that make it much harder for an adversary to break in. You know, we'll talk a little bit about what that means in practice. David talked about the you know, the national cybersecurity strategy and what the NCSC are doing with CyberFun and so on, and that's essentially reflective of organizations adopting a more advanced cybersecurity posture. So let's talk about a specific adversary now, one we've been tracking for a while now called Curly Spider. If you recall the nomenclature, Spider is an e-crime actor, Curly is the name of the e-crime actor here. And this has been a very active adversary in Ireland, so it's targeted a lot of organizations. They are a prime example of the evolution of social engineering. So typically what they'll do is they'll essentially spam bomb a target. So that could be someone in your organization, somebody who maybe has a high level of access. Maybe they're a, you know, they're a privileged user. They'll essentially spam bomb them and fill their inbox with spam. And then they'll call the target impersonating the help desk and saying, look, you know, we've been noticing you've been getting a lot of spam, and that's obviously resonates with the target. They say, yes, absolutely, I can't do any work here. My inbox is full of spam. And they say, well, I can help you. You know, I'm going to send you a link to your phone. You know, if you just follow that link, that'll allow me to essentially remediate and fix all the spam you've been getting. And from there, that's essentially their foothold. They typically use living off the land techniques, like using tools like curl, which are already on your system, no malware involved. They modify registry keys to establish persistence, and then they do things like they create a hidden user account for persistence. And the key here, I suppose, to call out is, you know, you've got maybe your endpoint protection, maybe you're doing detection response. You also need to pair that with something like threat hunting. And at CrowdStrike, we have a feature or a program called Overwatch, which provides proactive threat hunting to spot adversaries like Curly Spider, you know, who've accessed a system, they have established persistence without using any malware, and that can be a key thing to look out for. Let's look now at another classic attack that's, you know, you read in the newspapers every day. There's been another business email compromise or BEC, a financially devastating attack. Again, there's no malware, there's no complex exploits or vulnerabilities involved. It's about deception, trust, and exploiting human error. So attackers, again, they don't break in, they simply log in. We see this with adversaries, particularly among the Spider. Again, that's the e-crime. There's, you know, I mentioned Curly Spider. There's Aviator Spider as well, which rather than going for volume, so they don't typically have a phishing campaign, they go for a high value employee again, someone with specific access to financial processes in your organization. They might be in your accounts payable or something like that. So they craft an email, typically impersonating a trusted source with an urgent request. So that's typically, we see, people falling for this again and again. They click on a link. They usually taken to a fake login page, which is incredibly difficult to protect against because it's typically spun up, an hour before the attack begins. So it's very hard for URL filtering to spot. They steal credentials using that page, and that once the attacker has access to their email account, for example, they can then they can go into Exchange Admin Center, create email forwarding, so they can then forward all emails to an external account. The victim knows nothing about this, of course, but it allows the attacker to silently monitor communications and prepare for the final stage of the attack, which is, we call that action on objectives. They typically impersonate the compromised employee, and they can then send fraudulent invoices from a valid email account. So they can request, for example, a wire transfer as that person. Everything checks out, all of the email controls that you've painstakingly put in place, like DKIM and DMARC, they're not going to be effective here because it's a valid email from a valid employee. So they're going to bypass any security checks. And it's very, very easy for somebody to fall for the directions that they're giving to request a wire transfer, an IBAN change, that kind of thing. So typically, most organizations will only discover this attack after the damage has been done. So, when a customer flags a payment hasn't been made or there's been a bank alert on fraudulent activity, typically the funds are missing by then. So essentially, this is another type of attack that CrowdStrike specializes in preventing against, and this is something we'll talk about. And hopefully, if I have time, I'll be able to show you a little bit around that. Another thing that we've called out in the threat report this year is the increase in Chinese threat activity. So we call that China Nexus. These are affiliated threat actors, loosely affiliated with China. We call that Panda. So that's the nomenclature we use. We've seen a 150% increase in threat activities. This is some of the most sophisticated threat activities you'll see out there on the internet today, typically using things called orb networks. These are operational relay box networks of compromised IoT devices. They could also be commercially purchased VPS hosts. But essentially, you won't see these attacks coming from China. You'll see them coming from Azure in Ireland or AWS. You will see them coming from trusted sources, in inverted commas. We are raising the bar to the cost, the cost of these adversaries by protecting with Falcon Complete, and I'll show you how that's done in a couple of slides. But essentially, this is something that CrowdStrike are tracking and monitoring our threat intelligence very closely. And we've seen a huge increase, like I said, particularly in China. You won't really hear about these in the news so much because typically they will be very targeted attacks. It's nation states, so it's very sophisticated, very hard to block. Okay, another thing, and again, this is particularly attributable to China, is the use of a cloud-conscious adversary. So these are cloud-native adversaries that live in control planes of some of the largest cloud providers like GCP, like AWS and Azure. They are experts in manipulating cloud resources. So, for example, one of the things they will do is they will break into your control plane and start using and leveraging, for example, LLM resources. They will leverage those to further attack, further seek access into your environment. And that's something that we have to be wary of. We have to be wary of data that's increasingly in cloud services, in SaaS services. We have to be aware of these. We have to protect against them. Another key aspect that I'm going to call out is vulnerability exploitation. So, there's been a huge increase. There's been a lot of high-profile network exploitable vulnerabilities. So, for example, typically, if I was looking to red team or do a pen test on an Irish organization, I'd typically just open up Shodan. I'd find my favorite VPN concentrator exploit that's just been released. There's about a sort of two or three dozen in the last 2 years that have exploitable code publicly available on the internet. I'd do a Shodan search against an organization for that. I'd probably find one or two, and then I would leverage that to gain an initial foothold. That's why it's something like patch management is obviously critical, but then also your network device patch management is also critical. And this is really important, to essentially to prioritize these exploits. So, you've probably got a patch management on your endpoint. You've probably got a good program in place there. But what about your network devices? I'll hopefully, if I have time, I'll show you the CrowdStrike exposure management tool, which allows you to prioritize according to exploits actively being used within your industry and within Ireland and Europe. That's critical. Just another thing that springs to mind, we're talking about vulnerability exploitation. Another thing that we're highlighting in the threat report is that it's great to track CVSS scores, and high score is obviously something that you should track, but vulnerabilities with a low CVSS score can be chained. So if you can have something like, for example, a low scoring authentication access vulnerability, but if that's chained with a post-authentication privilege escalation vulnerability, even though they might individually have a low CVSS score, they might result in a big vulnerability for your organization because they might represent a foothold, a way of getting a foothold. Okay, so let's talk about ways to reduce risk. So the classic steps, these are no different to what's been called out probably for the last couple of years. But now what I'm calling out here is they're sort of tailored to the adapting threat landscape, and especially here in Ireland. So number one, and this is, I think, the second or third year in a row where we've called out identity being a key risk factor in organizations. So your identity stores, whether that's on-prem, whether that's Active Directory, whether it's Azure AD, whether it's Okta, you need to secure identities because, again, threat actors are walking in with valid credentials, whether that's through an access broker, a misconfiguration, or password reuse, or somebody uses their corporate credentials on an insecure SaaS application, like the latest AI video generation application. They reuse their credentials that they use for your corporate environment. That insecure Chinese SaaS provider gets popped, and suddenly somebody has published on the dark web a list of credentials, including for a user of your environment. It's really important to secure your identity. And CrowdStrike, we have a specific module designed to protect against identity misuse. I mentioned cloud-conscious adversaries. It's important to defend the cloud from the classic, exposed S3 buckets with all kinds of customer information to misconfigured OneDrive and SharePoint. That's a critical attack surface you need to protect. And then supply chain and cross-domain gaps. Attackers live in the gaps between security tools. That's a really important point. So it's important to have visibility right across your tooling, your SaaS applications, and so on. I mentioned vulnerability exploitation and the need to patch according to adversaries. So, there's probably more important to patch against a e-crime actor that's actively targeting Irish manufacturing than it is to patch against something that's exploiting South American universities. It's important to know your adversary, and that's why CrowdStrike builds threat intelligence into everything that we do. So everything from detections right through to threat hunting is driven by understanding the adversary, understanding what motivates them, where they're targeting, and how. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about our Falcon Complete service, which is essentially our Falcon platform. That is the CrowdStrike platform. It was built with a single mission to stop breaches. It's built on a single agent, so that runs across Windows, Mac, Linux, mobile, cloud, right across the platform. We have a single code base to manage and maintain, and that allows us to be extremely forensic and surgical about how we manage preventing threats. We've standardized the process and workflows around that Falcon. So essentially, we can defend against the most advanced threats and determined adversaries using the Falcon platform. And that's why, for example, you'll see 2 months ago, there was a chat leak from a ransomware group, and they actually they were talking about EDR solutions and MDR solutions. And they called out CrowdStrike as being a sort of a walk away, don't bother if it's got CrowdStrike, move on to the next target. So again, Falcon Complete is our MDR service. It's the industry's most effective managed detection response. So it's full enterprise visibility across endpoints, identity, cloud, and third-party data. And so that essentially what that means is that you can augment your SOC or outsource your SOC to provide the detection, investigation, response capabilities, and that's through 24/7 expert-led protection, really fast mean time to detect and respond, and end-to-end remediation. So what does that mean? That means if you have a threat actor targeting you on a Friday evening, Falcon MDR, Falcon Complete will identify, block, and then remediate in real time, and then provide you with a report on that incident, so that when you kind of come back into work on a Monday morning, you can simply read the report, read what was done, everything's remediated, there's no further action required on your side, other than perhaps a few recommendations on how to prevent something similar from happening in the future. So what does that look like? Well, I mentioned it's across endpoint, identity, and cloud, but also third party. So typically what we find is that we will engage with an Irish customer, we'll typically provide Falcon Complete on endpoint, but we might extend that out then to third party. We might include their firewall, their Entra ID logs, and we might demonstrate over time the capability of Falcon Complete over those control points, and then we might start expanding that out over time as we demonstrate the value. And again, it's not just, we're detecting stuff and then calling you up. We're not a bell ringing service. We do full remediation, both on first party, that means on the endpoint where we've got an agent sitting, a sensor, but also on third party. So that means we can jump onto your firewall, your email gateway. We can remove, email forwarding from Exchange Online, for example, and that provides you with the confidence that you are fully protected end to end. There's also a breach warranty. That means that we provide a warranty around the service that we're providing. Typical response times in around 45 minutes, no customer effort involved. And finally, I'd like to leave you with this. So one of the key components, as I mentioned, in reducing your risk this year is around identity and protecting your identity assets. One of the engagements that we do takes about 3 days. Is we invite you to essentially install CrowdStrike on your domain controllers, or place a API connection with your Entra ID or Okta tenant. We will then deliver you a identity risk review, calling out areas of weakness in your identity implementation. For example, where you have users with compromised passwords, so that user might have a password that's been leaked in the dark web and is available for download, we will call out where that password is being used. For example, users that have high levels of risk. So for example, you might have a user using their valid credentials to say RDP into domain controller out of hours. Those types of risks we can call out. We can also do full AD hygiene and then preventative measures like multi-factor. That's something I'd encourage you to take a look at if you want to engage with myself or the guys in CommSec. We would be happy to facilitate that. Okay. I don't know how we're doing for time. I'm hoping we have a little bit of time left to look at the Falcon platform. Please, someone jump in if that's not the case.
Sure, Alex. I think we've a couple. I think we're doing okay for time. There's a couple in the meantime while Alex is bringing that up. If anyone has any questions they want to pop into the chat. I see there's a couple after coming in over email. Derek can take them, but just yeah, I'd say, Alex, maybe we've got up to maybe 5 minutes or so.
Okay, that's fine, Caoimhe. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure, obviously some people here may have seen the CrowdStrike platform. For those of you that haven't, this is the Falcon platform, and the first thing you'll notice is it's essentially it doesn't have any of the technical debt of perhaps some of the companies I've worked for previously, in that it's completely modern, built from the ground up for modern MDR applications, full API behind it. So anything that's accessible over the GUI, you can access over the API. And out of the box, even without our MDR service, you'll notice that AI is fairly front and center. Our generative AI is called Charlotte, and I'll show you that in a couple of minutes. But essentially what you see when you open the platform, again, even without the MDR service, is a list of detections and incidents that we've generated. And if we look, for example, we are going to highlight the critical, high, medium, and low. If we look at one of the critical incidents, for example, we can see that this is, first thing you get is a plain English description of what's happened. We also map everything against MITRE. So the MITRE framework there provides you with the ability to quickly see what type of incident this is. You can see this being tagged as lateral movement. I would say that's an extremely important one, because that, as I said in the presentation, that's particularly relevant to breakout time. Okay, so that means that an adversary, were it not for Falcon, could be implementing ransomware right now. You'll also see some of the remediation available. So this is available to you. You can network contain all hosts. What that means is you knock them off the network. They have no access to the internet whatsoever, or indeed the network, except to Falcon and except to services that you define. And that allows you to then, for example, do forensic imaging on the device. It allows you to grab files from the device and anything you want to do. But you can see here in this incident timeline summary, you can see what's happened. It's been contained and lifted. It's been assigned as in full incident response workflow. The actual execution has been blocked. Okay, so you can see here it is an important incident, but it has been blocked by Falcon. So the full context around that incident is available. Okay. Down here, you'll see the host, the identity, exactly what happened, and an incident timeline. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to jump quickly to our Falcon Complete service. So down the left, you'll notice all of the features and risks that I talked about: cloud, identity, SaaS. They're all called out as modules on the left-hand side. But if I look at, say, Falcon Complete detections, this is now, in contrast to what I showed you before, these are detections for which we've tagged as Falcon Complete. And that means one of our human analysts has taken a look at this detection, has essentially determined it to be an incident that you need to look at, essentially. So let's take a look at this. So if I click on the actual incident here, what it'll draw out now is a tree of exactly what's happened. And we can see, for example, here why we have figured out that this is a detection that's worth looking at. We will call out the file path. We will call out in plain English what has happened. And we will give you some of the contextual behavior and also the host behavior, including full context around where that host lives, the IP history, assets, vulnerabilities. So everything is available in the context of that incident. Okay. I'm just going to show you one more feature before we move on. We have a feature called attack path analysis. And what that means is essentially, if I was an attacker looking at your organization, how would I get in? Okay. And you'll see here, we break that down into critical, high, medium, and low. I'm going to show you critical for obvious reasons, because it's more interesting. So this essentially is calling out what attack paths can be exploited by a adversary. And I'm just going to get, and I think this is really nice because this is essentially understandable by anyone. Okay, so you've got an internet exposed asset here. Okay, that internet exposed asset is connected directly to a critical asset, okay? And if we take a look here, for example, here is why we're calling it out as critical. Look at all the vulnerabilities, all the CVEs that are unpatched on that system. And I can then drill down. For example, I can say, well, these are vulnerabilities that are nice and theoretical, but which ones are being actively used? And we use a thing called expert AI to determine that. So it's not just that it has a vulnerability that's, as I said, theoretical, but does it have a vulnerability that there is a shell code available on GitHub for example? So that's why we call out that these vulnerabilities, we prioritize them for you, so you're not chasing your tail, remediating vulnerabilities that are not particularly applicable to your environment. So not only do we say, look, this is the details of this particular CVE, we call out where are you vulnerable, right? So list all of the hosts in your organization that are vulnerable, what you should do, okay? So here's the monthly roll-up that you need to patch with, and that will essentially remediate that. I mentioned the expert rating. This is, again, why we're calling this out as being critical. We call out the reasons why. Expert rating, again, is that AI driven. It's a dynamic rating. So CVSS is obviously static. Expert is dynamic, and that might change based on what threat actors are using it, and so on. Here, for example, we've actually given you a link to the GitHub code that is available for anyone to exploit. Okay. Okay.
Thanks a million, Alex. Sorry,
I
I'm just
think
going
I'm out of time. Apologies.
You're close. Are you? Just in the interest of time, I know there's probably a lot of people who are waiting to get on this quiz. So,
Sure.
I just before we move on to that, Alex, thanks a million. Some brilliant insights there. I think it's worth noting as well. I mean, it's really. I've been experienced with CrowdStrike for a number of years, and it really is the enterprise solution that I guess part of our red teaming, it's difficult to get by, as you said, some of the shared chat of hackers. I guess it's also worth noting, though, that there is a recognition out there that it's not just the enterprise. While you get true enterprise protection with CrowdStrike, there is a very attractive bundle for customers who are, deemed more of an SMB level. So if you're below 250 users and you believe that CrowdStrike sounds very appealing, but you feel that it's outside your budget, come talk to us. There's some very attractive bundles out there. It's not a pared down service at all. It is exact same Falcon Complete that is at the larger enterprise level, but there's a recognition by CrowdStrike that the budgets may not always be the same at the lower level as at the true enterprise grade. So do come talk to us if there's anything there that has heightened your interest with Alex. I guess before we just move on, I just want to there was one question that came in now, and see David has answered it, but just for anyone on who may have missed it in the chat, a question came in asking if you're not an Enterprise Ireland client, is there still access to cybersecurity funding? So the short answer is yes, there is funding. While it won't be through the Enterprise Ireland and NCSC, your local enterprise board will be able to support, and that's something that you can get in touch with them directly, or if you're struggling to navigate that, reach out to the CommSec team. Before we move on to the quiz, if there's I don't see any more questions coming in. Dara, have any more come in directly to you?
No, we can head straight to the quiz, Caoimhe, if that's okay.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, Valentin has just raised his hand there.
Valentin, Dara, can you remove mute for Valentin there? I think there's a query after coming in.
Let me try. Hello, Mike. Go ahead, Valentin.
Hi, very insightful presentation. Thank you for this. I was interested to see if Falcon would have email filtering as well included in the system. No, okay. Thank you.
So what we do is we partner with sort of the likes of Proofpoint, Mimecast, Microsoft to provide that capability. It's outside our core competence. Like I said, our MDR service encompasses things like Proofpoint, Mimecast, and so on. But we don't directly supply that ourselves.
It's probably something we could help with, Valentine, if you want to get in touch with us.
No problem. Yeah, I have a competitor that includes everything. Is extremely pricey. So I'm trying to see if there's any other competitor that I can choose that includes that instead of just having separate services with different companies. I do prefer to have everything with one single one. I've seen Falcon has endpoint protection, has few good solutions in there, but I was interested in that also. We can talk, no problem.
Okay, great.
Okay, so without further ado, hopefully everybody can see my screen there. So if you can take to scan that QR code or go to that link, we'll be able to start the quiz. There seems to be a number of people still live, so I'll give you a couple of moments just to get that up there.
Yeah, Caoimhe, I've just dropped the link into the Q&A chat there, so everyone should be able to see that.
Okay, brilliant.
And I will share my screen so people will be able to see it. So just to let everyone know, there's a time limit on this. So there's 60 seconds to get your answers in. So we have a nice quick quiz, and then we can reveal the answers. So it's based on the correct questions and who's in first. So question one, as Alex kindly mentioned, what is the current breakout time according to the CrowdStrike 2004 Global Threat Report? Is it 1 minute and 5 seconds, 2 minutes and 7, or 51 seconds? Question two, who is George Russell's F1 drive partner at Mercedes AMG Petronas? Is it Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, or is it the new kid on the block, Kimi Antonelli? Our number three, can you name the cyber gang behind the M&S breach earlier this year? I think it was back in April. Is it Klopp? Is it Lockbit? Or is it Scattered Spider? I know, Alex, you had made references to Spider quite a bit there throughout your... So I will stop sharing my screen. Caoimhe, if you want to share your screen, we'll get the results up.
Sure.
So we have 10 responses, which is good. And
Drum roll.
drum roll, please.
Dun, 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 dun.
I would love that Lego model. Pity I can't.
Just 1 sec there now. It's downloading the Excel sheet. Yeah, it's a good model. It's the large model, by the way, if anyone's interested. Pretty good. So the winner is Dean Cox is the winner. So
Fair
Dean,
play.
thanks very much for that. We'll be in touch with the he was the quickest in by a minute, actually.
Well done,
So
Dean.
we'll be
Well
in
done, Dean.
touch with getting that out to you. Thanks very much.
Well done,
Thanks,
Dean.
everyone.
Listen, thanks a million for taking the time out of your busy weeks. We really appreciate it. We hope you found those presentations interesting, and if there's anything at all that has sparked your interest, whether it be to try try the risk review, to get in touch with CommSec around NIS2 assistance, the Enterprise Ireland or funding, or if there's anything that you want to learn in terms of, I kind of cut Alex quite short on the demo, but if there's anything else you want us to help you with, feel free to reach out to us here in CommSec, and thanks again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.